Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Winnipeg Free Press, the Manitoba Seniors Coalition, and the Centre on Aging, I would like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for viewing the movie and hearing from the panel. And hi, I'm Michelle Porter. I'm a bit of a ghost here tonight. Can't get my video settings to work properly, but I'm the director of the Centre on Aging at the University of Manitoba here in Winnipeg. And I'd like to start by acknowledging that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge—
Sorry, Michelle, sorry to interrupt, but we have some audio doubling here.
Here in Winnipeg.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, it's fixed.
Okay. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and cooperation. During this panel, you're going to hear from the filmmaker and his mother, Sian-Pierre and Rebecca. You're also going to hear from Jeff Palamar, an award-winning Winnipeg lawyer with the Taylor McCaffrey law firm, who specializes in labor and employment law. Before we get to the panel, though, I just wanted to say a few words about the Manitoba Seniors Coalition. All of the organizations, which you can learn more about at the website, and I will share that in the link, they work to make the lives of older people in Manitoba better. That includes working to combat ageism, providing activities, programs, and services for older people, making environments age-friendly, and advocating for older people. And to learn more about the Centre on Aging and our many events and research, you can go to our website, which I will also put into the chat box. And before we move to the questions and answers, Jeff Palamar is going to say a few words about age discrimination in Manitoba and what the laws say.
Absolutely, and thank you, Michelle. Thanks everybody for being there. I'll try and give you a Coles Notes version of ageism law, if you will, in the few moments I have right now. There's human rights legislation all across the country. In Manitoba, we have something called the Human Rights Code of Manitoba, and that code impacts all of us. The preamble is very powerful. It talks about how it's the right of all individuals to be treated in all matters solely on the basis of their personal merits, to be accorded equality of opportunity with all other individuals. The code protects us against all discrimination, which is unreasonable, including discrimination based on stereotypes or generalizations. The code ensures that we have reasonable accommodation made for those with special needs. The code notes, and I think this is quite important, that there is much discrimination rooted in ignorance, and education is essential to eradicate that discrimination and that ignorance. So education is a big part of human rights. Finally, the code preamble indicates that these various protections for human rights of Manitobans are of such fundamental importance that they merit paramount status over all other laws of the province. So if Manitoba, for example, were to pass a law that were contrary to human rights law, the Human Rights Code would override that, it would trump it, if you will. So human rights law is super important in Manitoba, in Canada. It's quasi-constitutional, one could say. It defines discrimination in a very broad sense. Differential treatment of an individual on the basis of that person's actual or presumed membership in or association with some class or group of persons is discrimination. So whether the person actually is part of that group or not, if they're perceived to be part of that group, that's discrimination. Discrimination also includes a failure to make reasonable accommodation for someone's special needs based upon being part of a group. So again, there's accommodation to the point of undue hardship. It's quite an obligation. As you might expect, human rights law protects people against discrimination because of things like ancestry, nationality, religion, things of that nature. But also importantly here, in the context of our discussion tonight, age. People are protected from discrimination against them on the basis of age. And of course, discrimination includes any act or omission, regardless of whether the person intends to discriminate or not. That's called systemic discrimination, where someone does not intend to discriminate, but by just the byproduct of what they've done, there is discrimination. There are exceptions, of course, because what was a law without exceptions? There's exceptions for the age of majority, so you can discriminate against someone in a bar, for example. They can't work there unless they're at least the age of majority to be able to serve alcohol. And there are other exceptions that exist just as a matter of the law. Now, process is interesting. Process is important for us here. If you're unionized, you go through your union and your collective agreement. If you're non-unionized, you go through the Human Rights Commission. In both cases, the process is free. In both processes, it's remarkably slow, iceberg-like in some ways. And often whatever gets decided at the initial level gets challenged in courts. So it can be a very, very long and painstaking and frustrating process. It's interesting, and I'll use that word for lack of a better word, for the lawyers involved, because the issues are inherently really interesting from a legal perspective. But for everybody else who's involved, probably best described as complicated, confusing, frustrating. Not a great process in many ways, unfortunately. Cases are always decided on the very specific evidence before the courts or arbitrators or adjudicators and the particular law that's in place at that particular moment. And the law changes, the statutes change a little bit from time to time. It used to be up until 2012, a provision of the Canadian Human Rights Act, which actually allowed discrimination in the context of age, where somebody would be retiring at the normal age for retirement. You could force somebody to retire. It was what was deemed the normal age of retirement. That does not exist anymore. Presently in Canada, to my knowledge, there are no such laws requiring somebody to terminate their employment at any given time. But then it falls back to the normal thing, that discrimination is only illegal if it is unreasonable. If it can be justified as reasonable, then it's lawful. As an example, in dealing with pilots, yes, an airline can discriminate against a pilot who is not able to see because they want to have a pilot who's able to see to be able to operate their airplanes. Plainly, that's discrimination based upon the person's physical status, physical disability of not being able to see. But that's deemed to be reasonable discrimination. It's a bona fide occupational requirement for pilots to be able to see, to operate airplanes. And it would be undue hardship for an employer to hire someone like that or keep somebody employed in that circumstance. Now, that's an easy example, but obviously there are much tougher or trickier examples out there. As one, the International Civil Aviation Organization apparently has an age limit of 65 for pilots. So if you are an airline and you are subject to the requirements of the International Civil Aviation Organization based upon where you fly, it might be lawful to discriminate against pilots on the basis of age. Conversely, if you're not subject to the International Civil Aviation Organization because of where you fly, it wouldn't necessarily be legitimate to discriminate. The point of this is it's not simple. And I know that's a real surprise from a legal perspective. It's not simple, unfortunately. And it always depends on the specific circumstances. And apart from the inherent problem, the legal process can be complicated, as not at all simple. It's very, very slow. And these cases typically take years and years and years to be decided. So from a lawyer's perspective, I offer something slightly different, a perhaps more practical or simple solution to ageism to consider. One is not making comments yourself, which perpetuates stereotypes. The little laugh, oh, sorry, having a senior's moment, perhaps try and avoid that if you can, or similar types of comments. If you see somebody making those types of comments, perhaps politely, forcefully, appropriately, let the person know that's not on. You shouldn't be saying that. And thirdly, perhaps interacting with different age groups so people can understand from firsthand experience that the stereotypes they may see on TV or in the movies, they're not on, they're not correct. People, just because they are a certain age, have not lost their ability to contribute to society and be part of a viable functioning group and help everybody move the ship forward. So that's what I can offer you right now. My Coles Notes version of human rights law is turned over to others who are much more interesting than I am.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And we've had some nice comments coming in about the film and Rebecca being so brave to skydive and showing your strength and character. Just wondered if the two of you can give us a bit of an update on your situation since the film ended and where things are at while we're waiting for some questions to come in.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us, first of all. so cool to be in Canada, virtually.
I love Canada.
And, I think we do echo a lot of what Jeff was saying. I mean, the process of, when we initially started this film and were thinking about what we could do, when my mom was fired, we were just told it would take very long. You needed a lot of resources, and it's very, very hard to prove precisely. The courts here in the States are very kind of almost, I hate to say pro-age discrimination, but it takes an email, it takes a really precise proof that something was that somebody was discriminated on behalf of for their age specifically. But we are good. We are living together with my partner, who's here in the house, and doing these little Zooms on the side, and really kind of learning how to like grow up together again in some ways. How are you? How do you
I'm
do?
doing well, and tomorrow we're off to England, where our movie will be showing in London and Liverpool.
In cinemas.
So it's been exciting, and meeting people and hearing from people all over the world. What happened to me has happened to so many hundreds of people. The same story, the same thing. I knew something, I felt funny. They said this, they said that, and then suddenly you lose your job. It has to stop.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be, people like him in their age, if they don't stop it now, when they get to my age, they're going to be suffering in the same way.
Totally. I mean, I say that all the time, and we talk about that all the time. The great thing about this film, besides the fact, obviously, that I got to do all the things that my mom ever wanted to do, and we got to do those together, is, the fact that, like, it's an intergenerational story. And I think that that's part of the reason it's gone far and wide, is because we, as generations, and to Jeff's point, it's like, once we start to have the conversation about, well, what are we going to do when our parents are older? How are they going to survive? How are they going to thrive? How are they going to age in place? Like, that's a place that I share with a lot of peers right now. And it makes us think about, well, age happens to all of us, right? It's the one protected class that we'll all experience. And so, like, how do we work to sort of reverse the self-harm that, it's so easy to say, it's too old, I don't want to hire this person because of this or because of that, or she moves so slow, blah, blah, blah. It's like, that is going to happen. Those tropes are going to be put on all of our backs. So how do we sort of reverse the narrative early? Anyway, long-winded answer, sorry.
No, that's great. You've alluded to some of the things in the first question I have for you here. So you have heard lots of stories that were coming in for others that have experienced that. Has all of that still continued? And has anything come of all those connections?
Oh, well, we're in touch. I mean, he taught me Instagram, and I have like almost 50,000 followers, and people that started writing, with their stories when we first went on Instagram and they heard about our story, they're still in touch with their updates and following the movie and things like that, and talking to groups. And
my mom has friends now all across the globe that they sort of share their stories together, and they're not always pretty, right? And I think that this film has really opened up channels for her and for us to be able to have the conversation. You have become actual real life friends with some of the people who have reached out, but the greater thing, I think, is like the amount of times we have been able and been given a platform because of other people and because of our community to tell this story. The story has been seen some 1 billion times. And through press interviews and through trailers and through all of those things. And, to be able to have that platform to discuss ageism on a global stage has been really, really thrilling, because it's happened here and there before, but finally we're getting a film out there that stars, a 75-year-old every woman, like somebody that others can see themselves in. A lot of films don't get that opportunity, and so we feel really lucky.
And because I've experienced things firsthand myself, I've been able to talk with like in Washington. And now we have laws, being put in place for like age discrimination when you're in the job application process. And because of the things I found, they don't ask you, how old are you? It just says, scroll down to date last finished high school. And you scroll down and it stops at 1979. Well, hello, I was in college at 11. I lived in England. You go to college, you take an exam, you go, oh, it's like
it was the 50s for you.
50s.
Yeah.
So now with the PODRA Act, protect older Americans in the job application process, that's going to stop.
So that's on part of the infrastructure bill that's in our President Joe Biden's hands, well, really in the hands of the Senate. But so we're working on really trying to make some change out of this story and out of everybody else's stories.
Yeah.
Someone has a question about the pandemic. Was the pandemic part of making this documentary?
Pandemic was not on the horizon when we started it in 2017. Only like it happened during the making of the movie.
Yeah. Toward the end, I mean, I'd already sort of went through the editing process, and then the pandemic happened as we were sort of getting ready for film festivals. And terrible, obviously, but I think because the sort of there was a light cast on older folks across the globe, right? People who were vulnerable for structural reasons or whatever, and this film was able to sort of be in conversation with how we treat older people, right? And who we would decide to keep, right? Like that conversation was big during coronavirus. And so I think the film really, was in conversation really well with that.
But also, I mean, 8,000 of people in Boston alone in the hospitality industry were laid off. Many of them immigrants, people not speaking a lot of English, doing excellent jobs. I am a lucky one. I had him. But when they say to Miss Maria, I'm sorry, Miss Maria, today is your last day, which is what was said to me. Where does Miss Maria go? Who does she talk to? What happens next? Nothing. Here's your paycheck, goodbye. Every social is closed. All the offices are closed. You can't reach anybody. Go online or go on the phone. We can call you back. Better try your call tomorrow, or your wait time may be 1 hour, 15 minutes. What happens to those people? There's no next time. We need to prepare for next time so that people know what to do when they lose their jobs and they have nowhere to go. Yes.
Next one, they're saying, I think age discrimination is worse for women. Think of male news reporters that continue to work and are thought of as icons, and women who age are deemed not attractive enough to be on television. Do you think age discrimination is worse for women?
Well, I think we can open this up to Jeff as well, but I think the statistics show that yes, they are. Yes, age discrimination is worse on women. I mean, there are multiple studies that, when you ask a man and you ask a woman whether they have ever experienced it, it's 3/5, 4/5 of women, and maybe 1/4 to 1/2 of men. But beyond that, it's sort of the system building on top of each other, right? So women oftentimes outlive their male counterparts if they are married, and oftentimes they are left with less and living longer. And so it's sort of the effects of what happens as a result of age discrimination that women just carry the brunt of, sort of systemic effects at every stage through life, but particularly when they're older. And so you find a lot more women who are in my mom's situation where they really are, or were at that point, struggling to move forward. And because discrimination, they are less likely to get rehired. So they're staying out longer, being unemployed longer, despite wanting to work. Jeff, I don't know if you have anything that you.
I quite agree with you, Sian-Pierre. It's interesting. I think, as the Human Rights Code of Manitoba talks about, education is important in order to deal with stereotypes and a lack of awareness of these issues. And I think a lot of times discrimination stems from or is built by systemically built situations that foster stereotypes. I mean, look at the movies. How often do you see someone of a certain age, a man, 60-ish, it's quite okay for him to be with a 30-year-old woman? See the reverse, and people won't go to see the movie because there's something wrong with that. It perpetuates a stereotype that a woman is only valuable, if you will, up until a certain age. And after that, she should be pushed off to the side in the bit parts, perhaps not even on the screen at all. And it's just so fundamentally wrong, but it's what we've grown up with, based upon movies, based upon TV, based on literature.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I'm really pushing that with particularly around the filmmaking community, but I think it's a mass conversation. It's, we have basically 4 streaming sites where people are going to. Sure, there are options like the theater that a lot of people are not going to as much anymore, or TV, but when you think about streaming, you want to watch Netflix, you want to watch HBO, you have very few sites to go to, one. And then when you open them, the narratives that are in there, as mentioned before, are what you're saying, right? It's like, it's guns, violence, sex, like all of that. And it's no real stories about what it looks like to be older in society today. Even if they are talking about old stories, it's like, in a care, and like an elderly care home, and people are robbing these nurses or the patients, or just like these really warped narratives, like. And if that's the only thing that we are able to watch because it's all that the canon or the library allows for, then we won't find our way out of this problem.
Yeah, it just reinforces the problem. Absolutely. Exactly. The perspective.
Couple of questions for Rebecca. Someone's wondering whether you're still working, and if so, how do you feel that you're perceived at your current job?
Well, my last employer, the job I got after I was fired from our wonderful, wonderful company, I worked with them till pandemic started, and I was just working part-time. And so I went on furlough, as did the whole hotel. The hotel that I was at was actually attached to a shopping mall of 3 big hotels there, all of them closed down. I was called back from furlough, but I, of course, having had to leave the apartment I was living in at my other in Boston, it was not feasible for me to go back to travel 4 hours there and 4 hours back on the train from New York, because we live in New York now, to Boston, to work 6 hours. The cost alone of getting there and back.
It's crazy that my mom was even considering it. I was like, what? You're going to take the train to go to Boston to work for 4 hours and then come back? Like, I was like,
if it was 2 days together, but the way I was scheduled, because I didn't care. I just want to work 16 hours a week.
And this is the conversation. It's like older people, a lot of older people, not only, want to work desperately, a lot of them have to work, but like, this is the energy that we're not like discussing, right? It's like, okay, at 80, she's willing to take a train to go up to Boston, work a full day, and get back on the train at night. Unfortunately, it's for so little money, but she's willing to do it, and she wants to do it. And so we're talking about this great resignation. There's so many people that, are my mom, just like wanting to work, and we're like, oh no, too old, we'll wait. It's just, sometimes I just don't understand.
It's not so much actually wanting to work, it's feeling needed and valuable.
Also
I had a good education. I gave my whole life to the job. I never called in sick. I never called in absent in my whole life. I've never been late for work. Just really not to be needed really was the hard part. And to lose your hotel family was even very much harder. The community, yes.
Question for you, Sian-Pierre. So you said at the end of the film about your role as an advocate. Someone wants to know more about advice that you might have for people and advocating for their aging parents.
I think a lot of what I've learned, as I sort of mentioned in the film, was through my mom. I think this is a really, when working alongside an aging parent, it is an emotional process, right? Because you're kind of going through aging with them, and sort of all that brings. And so I think the key thing is to remain calm and to remain patient. There are a lot of tangled lines between, I think, parent and child, or there can be at this really tender moment where you're starting to sort of advocate for your parent, and loss of pride, like lots of things happening, right? And so remaining patient and calm, I think, is the most important thing. And once you can do that, that starts to transfer over into the really frustrating bureaucracy that you deal with when being a true advocate or a caregiver. The hours that you're spending on a call or on a on a website, everything, data entry for your mom's medical history, all of that. I think what I believe is, like, I'm at this point in my life now, I'm lucky enough where I can take on more, and I'm like, I just need to take on more, and remain patient throughout and remain persistent. That's what it is. I mean, the systems are really hard, and these older people are invisible. So know that you as an advocate are going to experience that as well, right? Because you are working on behalf of an invisible person. And so you just got to be persistent and stand your ground, because these are the people that you love, right? And the more we can unwind the system, the better luck we'll have later on.
I understand. I'm an advocate. He has a mentally disabled brother who lives in Boston still in his own apartment. So I understand the work you have to do. You know what I mean? It's in a different thing. I'm not technically strong, on the computer and stuff like that. And his brother Gabriel, really, I do everything for him, on the phone, do all his accounting and everything. So I understand it's very, very hard.
Yeah, you taught me what I know.
Yes.
Rebecca, do you have a new bucket list?
Oh gosh.
I'm always asking her, but I'm also kind of like, can we do my bucket list? Like,
That's
it's
what
about
somebody
my
said.
time now.
It's his turn. He should write the bucket list. Now we'll go with him so long as he's paying for it. That's it. I'm not. He paid for my bucket list.
The people paid for it, really.
People paid for it. That's right. It really. He has other things. Now
the film has opened up different things for us that they're not so bucket listy. I think you have done that, but you're a lot more down to take on a new experience than you ever were before.
Yeah. My mother would say, "There's nothing you can't do."
I know. After jumping out of a plane, like, yeah.
Well, I don't advocate that. It was fun for the moment. I was duty free when my feet touched the ground. It was okay.
Jeff, a question for you. Are there supports for managers who are being pressured to write negative reviews with the goal to terminate employees and don't agree with it?
That's a great question.
That's a terrific question. Systemic supports, not really. I mean, the Human Rights Code prevents discrimination against people based upon the factors in the code that I mentioned in passing. If you are part of that process and facilitating the discrimination, if you will, you yourself could personally be liable for it, I suppose. So it's quite appropriate to take that back up to the person pressuring you and say, are you sure we want to do this? Because this puts not only me in the glue, if you will, but also the company in the glue, bringing to their attention through education that we can't do this. I suppose you could, in the worst case scenario, simply say, I'm not prepared to act illegally. If you're being put on the spot, you must do this. I'm not prepared to act illegally, and you can leave in those circumstances. You can treat yourself as being constructively dismissed, is what it's called, and effectively the employer has forced you to leave, and you could bring in an action against the employer in that circumstance. That'd be a last recourse, obviously, because it's not fun going to court or suing somebody or threatening to sue somebody, but it's an option. That said, if that's the type of workplace you're in where you're being forced to do things that are improper, I would question whether you want to stay there in any event.
Well, this is what happened. I found things that when I didn't agree with, and my thing was I would speak up and say, this isn't right, and as an instance is like putting out a handbook. It was mistyped, it was misspelled, the information was wrong in it. And I said, I don't think we can put that in the guest rooms. It's not correct. You can't give people this information. They're wondering why they're not getting through to their numbers. It could be an emergency and they can't get through. We need to redo it.
Mm-hmm.
No. That's it.
I was going to say, as a practical solution, the person in that situation might go to someone they trust within upper management, be it an owner, be it a partner, be it somebody senior in HR, disclose what's going on and look for recourse in that respect too. That might be the best thing to do from a practical perspective.
Okay, Rebecca, what would you tell your younger self? Would you have done things differently knowing what you know now?
Yeah, get everything in writing. When I took the job from which I got terminated, I was working at a major hotel, but I'd lived in the building where I made this new hotel for several years, since he was like 2. And they said, Rebecca, we want to make a hotel. Can you help us? We know you have lots of experience. So I did. I said, okay, go along. And I said, okay, good. We got the hotel together. I got the hotel together, hired the staff once it was all ready to go. And they were looking for a person that I had at my other hotel, like director of housekeeping. They said, will you take the job? I said, well, no, I can't do that because in those days I was paying rent. I said, you're not offering me enough money. I couldn't pay the rent here and work for what you're offering. Don't worry, Rebecca. We will take care of the rent. You will live here rent free. It will be an investment for you. Now, I was 65 then. It will be an investment for you. So I'm thinking, well, that's good. I don't have to pay the rent. It's the same thing. I don't have to get up. Nothing in writing. I'm thinking I'm going to be there and be carried out in my box. Until that one day, and they said, Rebecca, you're a valuable employee. You've done a wonderful job there, but today is your last day. We are restructuring. Was that an investment? No. No, not in writing.
The last question, person says, as a filmmaker myself, it was an amazing experience watching your story unfold, especially with some of the hard spots that you confronted to move forward. How is Joanne and your son?
Well, as a matter of fact,
I'm going to see Joanne when we're in England for our screenings, and Layla is going to come to the screening, and so that will be really great, and has opened up a new sort of channel of communication. And I think it was hard for Joanne in some ways for it to be so exposed. I mean, for it to be a global story, and so we worked through that, but then it started to open up the channel for some good conversation. So really, really happy about that. Layla is like a big girl now, and she
beautiful.
is like
So
in high school and a punk queen, and just like so gorgeous and so cool, and just really proud of her. And then Gabrielle, do you want to answer, Gabrielle?
My son, Gabrielle is chronic schizophrenic. He calls me average 34 times a day. Mommy, what are you doing? He misses me terribly. I spend once every month I go and spend some time with him, but he won't take medicine, and it's really tough.
Yeah, it's hard. So we're just advocating all around. We're all advocating. And sometimes that's what you got to do to survive, and lead with love, really. So yeah.
Right. Important message to end with, the role of the advocate for everyone around us. So thanks so much for sharing your story. Thanks for answering questions tonight. Thanks for being with us, Jeff, and sharing your knowledge of the situation here in Manitoba and answering questions. And thank all of you for joining us for the streaming of the movie and being a part of the panel discussion. And hope we see you out at other Center on Aging events or another Winnipeg Free Press movie night.
Oh, sounds like fun.
Thank you all.